Thank you very much. And Assalamu alaikum, greetings. This is Ishtiaq from Department of History, Islamabad, Quaid-e-Azam University. We are going to have a very wonderful session, and thank you to Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmed for honoring us with his presence. Dr. Ishtiaq Ahmed was born prior to partition of India, so he is most senior to Pakistan too. He holds a Ph.D. in political science from Stockholm University, and he is currently Professor Emeritus of political science. And he has published several acclaimed books, and these books have very significant importance for students of history and politics of South Asia. And his books won significant number of awards too. His book, Punjab, Bloodied, Partitioned and Cleansed, Unraveling the 1947 Tragedy Through Sacred British Reports in First-Person Account, won Best English Non-Fiction Book Award at Karachi Literature Festival and also at Lahore Literary Festival 2013. His book, Jinnah, His Successes, Failures, and Role in History won the Best English Non-Fiction Book Award at the Valley of Words, Dehradun 2021. And today we will be talking about this book. He is currently working on the partition of India, Punjab, and Bengal, who, what, and why. And I hope this book would too create a significant debate in literature of South Asia. Thank you very much, sir. We would like you to start with idea of how you came up with writing on this person, Mr. Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Like, you wrote about partition and South Asian politics. So how you end up with Mr. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and briefly enlighten us about your book. You can take your time, and then we would move toward question and answer session when you would be finished. Thank you very much again for honoring us with your presence. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Asfar, Niazi, and all the students and faculty, if they have joined. I consider it a privilege to talk to the students and faculty of the most eminent university of Pakistan, named after the founder of Pakistan, Quaid-e-Azam Jinnah. So this is for me really an honor. And so I'm looking forward that we have a very frank, open discussion. And as I said to Mr. Niazi, people are free to ask any questions, and I should have the opportunity to respond to them. We are academics. We are not politicians. And academics, in principle, if you look at the theory of what is knowledge, they seek the truth. So if you have an open mind, then I'm all willing to listen to you and respond to you. So now, a very good question, why this book? Well, because there is a controversy at every stage of Muhammad Ali Jinnah's life. What was his political ideology? What was his vision about Pakistan? How come a man who was once celebrated as the ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity ended up becoming the most relentless, uncompromising, unflinching supporter of the two-nation theory, which required the creation of Pakistan through the partition of India? So now the question is, why did I have to do this? Because, as I said, there is so much controversy. Of course, it's not very surprising. Leaders and their work are always a matter of debate, controversy, discussion, and so on. His peers, his contemporaries, his rivals, if you want to call, Gandhi, Jinnah, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, Sardar Patel, and you name it, all of them have controversies surrounded around what was their political career. So this is not very surprising that Jinnah's life is also surrounded by them. But the book was needed because those who wrote on him wrote as if there was nothing controversial. One can divide people who have written on Jinnah among those who write out of a feeling of devotion. And when you are writing out of devotion, then you are not free enough to take a detached view and a critical view. And then there are those who would just attack Jinnah without looking at the context. I am not here to run down anyone. I'm here just to fill in the gap in the understanding of what Jinnah did, how he achieved what he did, and what were the problems with some of his policies. That's the only rational, intellectually defensible way of looking at any leader. So I'm not writing, I'm not against people who wrote hagiographies. A hagiography is the story of a saint, and a saint is pious. He commits no error, and he is able to work magic. That's what a hagiography is all about. And then, as I said, views about Jinnah which are very critical. So then I wanted to know, what did Jinnah want? And what methodology did I use? Now, this is the main question, which I don't think others have done consistently. Of course, they have done. They have looked at Jinnah's speeches, but only those speeches which suit their purpose, whatever the purpose is. Even that is acceptable, because all national narratives sort of choose and select and eclectically present the hero. This would happen even in India, although now Gandhi and Nehru and so many others are being critiqued, being condemned, and so on. So this is not surprising either. I'm not against people who have just written praise about Jinnah. They are welcome to do it. This is the national narrative, and so fine. With me, that's all right. But I was there to find out the real Jinnah, his politics. Where did he succeed? How did he succeed? Where did he fail? Did he make blunders? All human beings should be judged that way. For me, every human being who is a public figure is answerable for his actions. So that's my philosophy of doing all my research. You look at my previous works, the Partition of Punjab. I spent 12 years collecting material from Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs who were affected by the partition. Previously, what people did was just write the Pakistani position or the Indian position, and the British just didn't want to write about it, except scandals about Nehru and Lady Mountbatten and Jinnah being a cold person. That sort of nonsense. We want to have a serious understanding of what happened, how it happened, why it happened. So for me, methodologically, the most faithful way of knowing Jinnah is by looking at his speeches and not missing those speeches which do not seem to tally with what I was arguing. So I would like anyone to challenge me to come up with a set of speeches which I have left out and which tell a different story. No. The way I have done it is 808 pages. All those speeches which are relevant for understanding his political career are there. Of course, some speeches are repetitive, so you don't have to repeat the same thing. So that's another challenge I make to all my colleagues, scholars. If they can come up with with a set of speeches which I have left out, I would be very pleased to know that. And I know I haven't. Second, there were two positions that I particularly liked. One of your own professor, Professor Farooq Ahmed Dar, he gave examples just to prove that Jinnah at no point was willing to compromise on the demand for Pakistan. And I think that is actually the more faithful and true picture than a totally fake position that Jinnah never wanted partition. He was just bargaining the Pakistan idea to get better terms for Muslims in a united India. The fact is, Jinnah is on record denying that over and over and over again, that the demand for Pakistan is serious. It is not meant as a bargaining chip. It is meant seriously. The Muslims need a state of their own. So methodologically, how did I rely, on what material did I rely to come to a conclusion? What did Jinnah actually want? And I say his own speeches. And that's the nearest you can come to a public figure. So now, if I'll go quickly through the 4 stages of Jinnah. The 4 stages of Jinnah is, Jinnah, first of all, is a fascinating personality. Fascinating that he was born in a minuscule community of Muslims, the Ismailis. Most Muslims of the subcontinent were Sunni, with a Shia Ashnashari being the second group among Muslims. The Ismailis were very few. And for him to become the leader of all Muslims and get Pakistan is an amazing achievement on its own. So I fully agree with Farooq Ahmed Dar, Professor Saab, and Professor Sikandar Hayat, his theory of charisma. I have looked at the material with a lot of admiration and respect, and disagreed because in my own analysis, I've gone beyond what they have done. And of course, that is the reason why new books are written. So I found that the material around me or in the field was not sufficient to understand Jinnah. But now, how do we explain somebody born in a minuscule? Minuscule is very small. It's not even tiny. It means very small community of Muslims becoming the leader of all Muslims. Well, most Muslims, and getting Pakistan. And we begin, first of all, with the first position of Jinnah. He started as an Indian nationalist. He joined the Indian National Congress 1906. Prior to that, when he was a budding politician of Bombay, in 1905, he was very critical of the partition of Punjab, of Bengal. He's on record, and I've quoted him. Then, when the Shimla deputation went to meet Lord Minto I think in October 1906, once again, Jinnah is on record condemning it as a divisive move. Then, when the All India Muslim League was founded in Dhaka, thirdly, once again, he condemns it as divisive. So that's the beginning of Jinnah. Jinnah becomes a leader of the Indian National Congress, and because of his qualities, he quickly rises to be a star in the Congress. And may I tell you, this is not mentioned by many, that the Congress encouraged him to join the Muslim League, because from the time of Sir Syed, the message to the Muslims was, do not join the Indian National Congress, join hand with the British, because as long as the British are there and you close ranks with them, you can draw all the benefits you want. The Indian National Congress wants to move in a direction which gives more and more rights to the Indians. That means opposition to British rule, and it means that the majority community of Hindus who were more educated would have an advantage. But Jinnah is not a follower of Sir Sayyid at that time. So 1916 is the high point of Jinnah as an Indian nationalist. The Lucknow Pact was agreed by both the Indian National Congress and the All India Muslim League, and it gave the Muslims of the minority provinces. What are minority provinces? Provinces in which Muslims were in a minority and Hindus were in a majority. Okay, so for example, in their representation was increased almost everywhere by 100%. If the Muslim percentage, as in Madras presidency, was 7%, I think they were given 15% representation. And in Bihar, I think they were 12%. This was increased double to that. Also in the UP, in all the minority provinces of Muslims, their representation was increased drastically in the Legislative Assembly, except for two provinces where then the Muslim majority had to make concessions. One was Punjab, which had at that time, at the beginning of the 20th century, 56% of the population. At the end, in 1941 census, that had increased to 57.1, but 56, okay? That representation was decreased to 50%. This was the way the British were balancing. When it came to East Bengal, now the Muslims of East Bengal were 52% of the Bengal population, but the British had not introduced, let me tell you, universal adult franchise, which means one man, one woman, one vote. They restricted the franchise to a very narrow section of people who had property, who paid revenue, and had some university education, that level. And the Muslims of East Bengal were very poor and very poorly educated. So under the existing situation, they were getting only 10% of representation. That representation under the Lucknow Pact was increased to 40%, still less than 52%. But in the case of Bengal, it's different. From 10, it rises to 40. In Punjab, from 56%, the representation goes down to 50. May I tell you that the Punjab leaders of those times, Allama Iqbal, Sir Fazle Hussain, Sir Mian Muhammad Shafi, all three were against the Lucknow Pact. People don't mention it because they thought Punjab's right to have the majority is being compromised to satisfy the Muslims of the minority provinces. But to cut a very long story short, in the Central Assembly, I mean, these were representations in the provincial assemblies, but in the Central Assembly, Muslims were given 33% representation. When, let me once again mention the figure, the percentage of Muslims in British India, which is British administered provinces, was in 1900, let's say, was 24.9%, or maybe 25.9%. But if you included the princely states, which were not then part of the electoral, people, it would reduce to 24.9%. So only 25% of Muslims were now given 33% representation in the Central Assembly. Now that's the high point. And I've quoted Jinnah, who then says that some Muslims fear, which Muslims, the followers of Sir Sayyid, that working with the Congress would mean ultimately Hindu majoritarian rule and so on. He says this is nonsense. Muslims are a very important minority. And of course, he had in mind very intelligently that Muslims were in a majority in the two most sensitive areas of India. One is, of course, where we all are, northwestern India. All the invasions, all the movement of people actually have been through those mountain passes. And then in the northeast, of course, the Europeans had come by the sea route. So that's a different story. So this is when Jinnah actually condemns those who are against working with the Congress and the Muslim League together to gain greater representation. They were not just then demanding full independence. So then what happens? I've said that Jinnah as a personality had some features which were attained a great reputation in South Africa, which was a racist regime for the rights of the Indians of all sorts. For example, Gandhiji went there to plead the case of a Muslim Memon businessman. But these were all Gujaratis. Anyhow, he comes back and Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah then addresses him. The welcome address is presented, and Jinnah Sahab definitely praises Mahatma Gandhi's great contribution and admires him. Reportedly, when Gandhiji got up, he said, "I'm greatly pleased to see a Mohammedan leader also on the same platform." And then he went on and so on and so on. According to Stanley Walpott, most famous biographer of Jinnah, Jinnah didn't like that at all. Jinnah thought he was a leader of all Indians and not only a leader of the Muslims. By the way, at that time, Muslims were called Mohammedans. This was the English way of saying it. So there was no insult involved at that time. It was quite common. So anyhow, that apparently irked Muhammad Ali Jinnah. But things moved on. Then in 1917, at an annual conference of the Indian National Congress, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, when he got up to make his speech, he started speaking in English. And some of the people there, including Gandhi, they said, "Speak in Gujarati, speak in Gujarati." And I think that is the second point at which Jinnah didn't like this sort of catcalling. The third situation comes later. Before we move to it, which is the breaking point, what happened was that after the Second World War, Indians of all sorts, were hoping that the British will reward them for their loyalty during the war. You know, large donations were given by Indians of all sorts, especially from the Punjab, where they recruited the army. All the landlords had made fantastic contributions. I was looking at the list from Lahore, and the Qizilbashes, they had contributed a huge sum. All of them did, Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs. But the British respond with the Rowlatt bills. Now, the Rowlatt bills gave extraordinary rights to the state to arrest anyone on the suspicion that such a such person is conspiring to bring down the legitimate government of India, which means British imperial rule. And so if you look at the speeches it was then called the Imperial Assembly. Later on, a year later, it was called the Central Assembly. I have quoted Jinnah condemning British rule in the fiercest of words. So even at that time, Gandhi and Jinnah is the hero, talking about the freedom of Indians and the dignity of Indians. Then comes the problem. And the problem is the Khilafat movement. Of course, there is a lot of scandal about it and a lot of nonsense written about it. But I'm one who believes that the Khilafat movement was a genuine concern of the Muslims of India against the only symbol of Muslim power in the world, that is the Ottoman Empire. And there is nothing wrong in having such a feeling or association. So the problem was that during the war, the British tried to convince Muslims that they will not dismember the Ottoman Empire if they agreed to fight for them against the Turks. And they also got a fatwa from the head of the Barelvi sect, Maulana Ahmad Raza Barelvi, saying that since the Turks were not from the tribe of the Quraysh of the Prophet, they cannot be the caliphs of Muslims. And after that, you find in Punjab and in many parts, the peers, who are Barelvis mostly, going out and recruiting Punjabis into the Indian army and elsewhere as well. What was Jinnah's position on this? I have quoted Jinnah that in 1919, he was part of a Muslim League delegation who went to England to plead the case of the Ottomans, telling them Indian Muslims will not like it, and please do not dismember the Ottomans at the end of war. Nobody gave any attention to them. Then in 1920, I have quoted Jinnah saying that first they took away our liberty. What is he saying? Liberty means the Rowlatt Acts, and now they are taking away our faith. And what is the faith involved? Loyalty to the Sultan or the Caliph sitting in Constantinople, Istanbul, whatever you want to call it. So people who say that Jinnah was against the Khilafat question are speaking a lie. The problem begins when instead of making speeches on the floor of the assembly, the Muslims of India wanted it to be brought into the streets to protest British policy against the Ottoman Empire. And Quaid-e-Azam was not willing to take part in it. He just wanted to confine his participation to speeches. So they went to Mahatma Gandhi. The Muslims went to Mahatma Gandhi and not the other way around. So to blame Gandhiji is once again absurd. Think if he had refused, then Indian Muslims would say, here is a Hindu who, when we are in trouble, is not willing to help us. So he agreed. He said that the struggle for maintaining the control of the Ottomans on at least the holy sites of Muslims is perfectly justified. And I have actually quoted in some of my books, Som Anand, a Lahore Hindu, saying that that was a high point when Hindus and Muslims started becoming very friendly to one another. So in northern India, it had a great effect. But Mahatma Gandhi gives leadership. He becomes a mass leader as a result of it, which Jinnah again did not like. But finally, at Nagpur, when Jinnah Sahab had recently married, he took his wife to this meeting, and once again, when he started to speak, he was, once again, Jinnah irritated maybe some of the followers of Maulana Muhammad Ali Johar and Mahatma Gandhi by calling them Mr. Muhammad Ali and Mr. Gandhi. And there were protests, and Jinnah left the Congress never to return. So that's the point where the Hindu-Muslim ambassador unity comes to an end. What happens then? Jinnah then, I think, developed a psychological problem with Gandhi. I think he believed that he was the senior in terms of the Congress leadership. Gandhi comes and he captures the leadership by taking the issues in the street. It's up to you to agree with me or not to agree with me. But just look at what is happening in Pakistan. When the assembly debates do not suffice, what does Imran Khan do? He takes the issues into the streets. Whether he will succeed or not, only time will tell. But doing this, taking it to the street, is one way to protest policy. To blame Gandhi and the Muslims that this was some sort of Islamic revival is nonsense. It was an anti-imperialist, anti-colonial movement of the Muslims for some dignity in world politics. Anyhow, then Jinnah Sahab, I have called him becoming what is known as a communitarian. I mean, this word you have to learn. It comes from the word community. Communitarian is believing that your community deserves special protection, but it does not entail hatred for other communities. So communitarianism is a positive position. Jinnah Sahab, until 1917, used to say, we are all Indians. Now he started saying, India is not one nation, but it is constituted by many nationalities. And among the nationalities, he counted Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, the Dalits. You know, Dalits are the deprived people among Hindus, and the Dravidian people of South India. So here comes a new position that India is not one nation. India is constituted by many nationalities. And then he argued that in the future constitution of India, most powers should belong to the provinces, and only the center should have such issues which need a central, all India level positioning, and that is foreign affairs, defense, and communications. And it should have just enough right to demand taxes for this. Now, I have argued that this was untenable. India was too large a state. If it was to remain united, it needed a strong center, but a federation where the provinces and the center divide the powers substantially on both sides and go forward. So from the Indian National Congress, they organized the Nehru Committee, and the Nehru Committee was presided by Dr. What's his name, yaar? A Muslim, great Muslim, Mukhtar Ahmed Ansari. This committee then appointed Motilal Nehru as the chairman, and all parties were invited to come and participate to frame a constitution for India. The British were saying, you Indians are unable to agree on anything, so come up with a constitution. So for several months, people met. Two Muslim leaguers did take part, Ali Imam and Shoaib Qureshi. Jinnah Sahab decided not to take part in it. He had demanded certain, concessions, which after he disowned. And once again, Skandar Hayat and Professor Rafiq Afzal, both are on record saying that it is the Muslim League which disowned the Lucknow Pact. They walked away. They wanted more rights and so on. So that was the end of it. Now, the Nehru report proposed that India will be a federation with a strong center. There will be no state religion. Men and women will have equal rights. The national language of India would be Hindustani, and it will have two official scripts, Devanagari, in which Hindi is written, and Persian Urdu, in which we write Urdu. Whereas all the provinces will have their own provincial languages to deal with. So that was the Lucknow Pact, Nehru Report. Muhammad Ali Jinnah kept out of it. And I have argued that had he been there, being a man of such immense capabilities, he could have made a difference. He could have won even more concessions if he wanted to. But if you boycott something, and politics and in history, there is no vacuum. Somebody fills the vacuum, and the vacuum was filled by all others who had taken part in this. And it also argued that there was no need for the Muslims getting overrepresentation, because overrepresentation is needed only if there is no universal adult franchise. Once you make every man and woman equal to vote, there is no reason for protection. And the Muslims are already in a majority in many provinces. On the other hand, they can have the same amount of representation in the provinces and in the Central Assembly as is their population. So that was agreed. Not what the electorates, and they had made. So the Nehru report didn't accept this. But if you look at the subjects which were divided, I think 39 were given to the center and 67 were given to the provinces. It was substantial autonomy granted to the provinces, and a government of so many people living together has to have strong central power. Look at what Pakistan, when Pakistan came into being, Jinnah Sahib created 100 times more centralized Pakistan, and rightly so. You need to have central authority to have your policies, your educational policy, your financial policies having a coherence. So I think the Nehru report was a very fair way of dealing with the national question, with the question of language, with the question of representation. But that didn't happen. So we find Jinnah Sahib then becoming a leader of the Muslims, and a lot of time is spent by him trying to capture the leadership of the Muslim community. There were many challengers. There was Mian Fazle Hussain, a great leader from Punjab. His services to the Punjab are immense, outstanding, never talked about in Pakistan. Sir Mian Muhammad Shafi, he was a leader of the caliber of Jinnah and was once, both were equal leaders in the Muslim League. Then there was, people in the UP and in Bengal. All of them were leaders. So Jinnah's second phase is actually a competition to become the leader of Muslims. How did he become the leader of Muslim and then the leader of the Pakistan movement? I'll now take up. So now, what is the third stage in Jinnah's life? The most important, the most celebrated, the most condemned, the most controversial. And that is that the idea that Muslims and Hindus somehow can't live together. You can go back deep into history. Some would go as far back as Sheikh Ahmed Sirhindi, of the Naqshbandi order. But I would say you have to look at Shah Waliullah had some such arguments. Then Sir Sayyid definitely. And then in my book, I've quoted many other such cases. But in the 1930s, this becomes mainstream. First, Dr. Iqbal goes to Allahabad and gives a call for that he sees the destiny of the Muslims of northwestern India as a separate state, within or without the British empire. When he said that, it was assailed by the British, saying that, are you preaching pan-Islamism? And he said, no, I'm not. How can Muslims ever think of going against the British? And he mentions that British rule is kept in India with the help of the Muslims. They serve in large numbers in the army and in the police. I mean, I've quoted Dr. Iqbal's speech. You can go and read it. He's on record. He says, no. We want to cooperate with the British, and we want to be the frontline state defending the British Empire against aggression from Central Asia and so on. The second position then is Chaudhry Rahmat Ali, with his Now and Never pamphlet of 1933, where he coins the word Pakistan, Pakistan. P for Punjab, A for Afghania, K for Kashmir, Istan for Sindh and Balochistan. Although this idea was then expanded to even greater number of countries, in Central Asia. We don't have time for that. Later on, the problem now was that both Allama Iqbal and Chaudhry Rahmat Ali were talking about the future of only 22% of the Muslims of India. Neither had any idea about the rest of the Muslims, what should happen to them. The largest concentration of Muslims was in Bengal. So this, for me, I've been very critical. This is actually proposing the division of Muslims, leaving them in India to create a small state in Northwest. Why? I don't see the point. But anyhow, this was the idea. May I say, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah was not very attracted to this notion of using Islam to get Pakistan. But what happens then is the 1935 act being introduced, the right to vote being expanded from less than 3% to 11% of the total population of India. I think in Punjab it was 11 point something, of which the adult were 28.7. Every fourth adult had the right to vote, including, I think, women, if they had property and education. So, under the 1930s 5 Act, the provincial elections were held. And in those elections, the Muslim League was routed in the Muslim majority provinces. In Punjab, the reserved seats were 75. I think they got 2, which became 1 when Raja Ghazanfar Ali crossed the floor and joined the Punjab Unionist Party. This problem that we are having in the Supreme Court is deeply rooted in our way of doing politics. People cross the floor and things take another turn. Punjab was ruled very well by the Punjab Unionist Party. They had created a most admirable harmony between Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs. The second most important leader after Sir Fazle Hussain was Sir Chotu Ram of what is now Haryana. Then it was United Punjab. And the Sikhs used to support the Punjab Unionist Party through the Sikh Nationalist Party of Sundar Singh Majithia. So they were doing very well. In Sindh, the Muslim League didn't even get 1 seat. It was won by the Sindh Ittihad Party of, I think, Allah Baksh Sumru and some other people. In the Northwest frontier, already Abdul Ghaffar Khan and his brother, Dr. Abdul Jabbar Khan, were allies of the Congress. So no seat there either. Balochistan had no representation then, electoral. It had a Shahi Jirga. And in Bengal, I think there were 84 seats reserved for the Muslims, of which the Muslim League got 40. 44 were won by the anti-Muslim League local Muslim parties, I think, Krishak Samajic Party. Yeah. यार ये बोलो नहीं Please don't disturb me. हैं? अब कितने मिनट रह गए हैं यार Azhar? When are we to finish?
Yes, sir. We have 10 to 15 minutes. Then I would inform you if meeting like.
Okay. Then we move into the third session. दोबारा record करेंगे. So, okay. So 37 election is the Muslim League doesn't do very well at all. It does relatively well in the Hindu majority or the Muslim minority provinces. Now comes the big question where I think Indian historians have a problem in accepting this, but 36, Jawaharlal Nehru makes a statement that we will abolish Zimidari in a free India and the peasantry will be empowered. Their rights will be the land to the tiller sort of proposition. He also announces that we will recast India, the whole of India, in according to the Soviet Union's model. That was a time when, against imperialism, the Soviet Union represented the will of the oppressed to get liberation, to get free from colonial domination. So it makes a lot of sense. But when he made this announcement, I think alarm bells began to ring all over India. Two places especially, among the landlords, Hindus, Muslims, and the rest, as well as among the British. If the British hated anyone in the world pathologically, it was the Russians. And after the Russian Revolution, that pathological position became doubly toxic. Okay. So they must have also realized that Congress rule and Congress leadership may not suit them in the long run. But that's not where Jinnah makes the breakthrough. In 1937, Nehru, after the result of the elections, says that it proves that the Muslims of India are not with the All India Muslim League, and that we have neglected the Muslims. It is time of Muslim contact, that the Congress will now start contacting Muslims in a large scale. And according to many, there was some gentleman's agreement that in the UP, whatever the results, the Muslim League and the Congress will form a coalition government. Now, the Indian historians, when I've talked to them, they try to deny that. They say there was no such agreement. It was only a local sort of understanding. But my own understanding is that there was, if not an official understanding, some understanding that we will form a coalition. And I think the reason was that nobody expected the Muslim League to do so poorly. But once the results showed that the Muslims didn't vote really for the Muslim League, especially in the majority provinces, the Congress took a stand which I think came to haunt them later. Who was responsible for it? Abul Kalam Azad was then, and then Rafi Ahmed Kidwai. These were the two Congress people in the UP. And then we have Jamiyat-e-Ulama Hind's Maulana Hussain Ahmed Madni involved in this. And there is a blame game. He did this, he did that. But on record, it is that Maulana Abul Kalam Azad recommended to Nehru that we should make it a condition that the Muslim Leaguers must resign from the Muslim League and join the Congress if they are to be considered for a ministerial position. This is on record. Although Azad blames Nehru for it, but I have seen evidence from both sides, and there is no doubt about it. So at that point, once again, I'd say Jinnah's leadership has to be acknowledged. An ordinary leader would have given in, knowing that the people had not voted for the Muslim League. But he came up with a stand saying that the Muslims either face extinction politically or they take a stand now to prevent the Congress from coming into power. So then you have 2 years of the Congress ministries, where you have from the Pakistani side or the Muslim League side, the Pirpur report and the Sharif report allegedly showing all the harm done by the Congress ministries against Muslims. I have looked at the evidence, and there is no substance of truth in this at all. The 3-4 British governors, the British hated the Congress because Congress was leading the freedom movement. On the 31st of December 1929 at Lahore, the Congress had given the call for India to become independent. And since then, they were leading the freedom movement. The Muslim League was still a communal small party, elite party, who would only negotiate with the British to get more concessions. So now, Jinnah then says that either we take a stand or we don't. So in the 1937 Lucknow session of the Muslim League, where all the leaders came, he was able to convince Sir Skandar Hayat, who had succeeded. Fazle Hussain had died in 1936 before the elections. So Skandar Hayat, who was the chief minister, that he should join the Muslim League, and all Muslim Leaguers in Punjab join the Muslim League, so that the Muslim League becomes the representative of Muslims at the All India level, whereas within Punjab, the Punjab Unionist Party can continue with its own government. When Sir Skandar agreed to it, Sir Chotu Ram protested. He said, ideologically, we are two different parties. The Muslim League represents a communal point of view. We are intercommunal. But Sir Skandar told him that this is only tactical. This is to keep the Muslim League out of Punjab. Here we will rule as we want. But that's not what happened, because a major event took place. 1939, the Second World War breaks out. And when the Second World War breaks out, the British are very jittery about holding on to India. Why? Because they had 2.5 million soldiers recruited from India, almost 1 million from Punjab. So they wanted their hold on India to continue even when the war was going on. The Congress commits the second blunder. It says that we will not take part in this war because you have thrust us in the war when we have elected governments. You have not consulted the elected people representing Indian opinion. So they resigned from their ministries. And that, I think, was a blunder of great proportions for the Congress, because on the 4th, the war breaks out on the 1st of September. Then on the 3rd, the British government and the Indian government of the British, Lord Linlithgow, commit India to the war. I think on the 4th of September, Mahatma Gandhi meets him and says that we should defend the British, but this is overruled by the rest of the Congress party. Jinnah Sahab meets Linlithgow, I think on the 7th of September, and he says, well, now you must realize the importance of the Muslim community. We are willing to support you, the Congress is not, but at the end of the war, you must give us a commitment that the Muslims will be given the right to self-determination over their future. Jinnah, well, come up with a concrete demand. And from that, then we have the Lahore session of the Muslim League, better known as the Pakistan Resolution, 23rd, 24th March 1947. That is when the formal demand for the partition of India to create Muslim states in north, eastern and north.
Oh my God. I am going.
बात सुनो यार, शुड आई स्टार्ट या कि क्या हुआ है? वो कहते हैं कि रिकॉर्डिंग बंद हो गई है। ओके, चलो
Continue,
जी,
sir.
चल,
You
अच्छा,
can.
वी विल स्टार्ट। सो after the Second World War and Jinnah going and meeting UNIF, please, yaar, please don't talk. I need your attention. So, shall I start?
Sir, you
Bolo yaar.
continue. I am sending the message. They would keep their mics off.
चले, should I start? हाँ, ठीक है। बात ये है कि, as I said, Jinnah Sahab meets Lord Linlithgow, the Viceroy, and says the importance of the Muslim community should be clear to you now. We will support you in the war effort. If at the end of war, we have the right to self-determination. Now, in November, we will come to that later. Then Lilithgow advises Jinnah to come up with a concrete demand then. So that concrete demand is then on the 23rd, 24th of March 1940 at Lahore, where they pass a resolution saying that they want independent sovereign Muslim states in northeastern, northwestern zones of India where Muslims are in a majority. But apart from the resolution and the discussion which I have given in detail, I have gone through the whole speech Muhammad Ali Jinnah delivered on the 22nd of March, a day earlier. And very few people refer to it. And if they refer, they only select small portions. I have the whole speech. And the whole speech is also analyzed, where the bottom line is that Hindus and Muslims have nothing in common. They have two different worldviews. Their cultural we Hindus and Muslims do not marry, do not dine together, and their heroes are the villains of Muslims and vice versa. To make such two nations, he says Muslims are not a minority. They are a political nation by virtue of being Muslims. Their own faith is the basis of being a nation, and it is fully qualified to exercise the right of self-determination. I think you should all, if you have my book, read that speech, because I've called it the foundational speech on which the two-nation theory is based. Of course, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, Allama Iqbal, Chaudhry Rahmat Ali preceded him. At that time, Jinnah was skeptical. Now he became its most successful exponent, proponent, leading now for the partition of India. Now there is a controversy. Yeah, that Jinnah didn't want Pakistan. It was only a bargaining chip. I have said, show me one speech after the 22nd of March, 1940, ever, even one, where Jinnah even remotely suggests a power sharing deal. He never did. So what I have done then is, on the 25th of March, when the Muslim League session finished, Jinnah gives a press conference where he says that the Lahore resolution is about the division of India. So I don't know from where this myth has been fostered that Jinnah didn't want a partition and the creation of Pakistan. And this idea then, Jinnah talks about several times, and I've quoted him, that this is a Congress conspiracy to say that we are just bargaining and that we want a power sharing deal. Not at all. We want Pakistan because we are two different nations who, if they are forced to live together, would lead to civil war. This is what he said on the 22nd of March. So I wonder from where people conjure this, that Jinnah didn't want partition. And let me once again remind you that Your own professor, Dr. Farooq Ahmed Dar, has given 3-4 instances where the Congress made pleas with Jinnah not to demand partition and claim whatever he wanted, even to become prime minister. And Dar Sahab says Jinnah overruled it, and I think he is 100% right. So let's put the record straight. There is nothing to suggest that after the 22nd of March, 1940, Jinnah at any point wanted anything else. We'll come to the cabinet mission plan towards the end of my presentation. I know these are the last 40 minutes. I have to go and have lunch with my buddies, you know. I thought all this will be over, but it's taking a bit longer. So I'll hurry up now. Then Jinnah Sahab, 1940, 1941, 42, 43, 45, 46. I've quoted speeches after speeches. Jinnah goes to the Muslim minority provinces and tells them, and I've quoted, look, you are destined, ye tumhari kismat hai, to be a minority. So do not be an obstacle to the freedom of your co-religionists in the Muslim majority provinces. तुम एक रोड़ा ना बनो उन मुसलमानों की आजादी में जो के नॉर्थ वेस्ट और नॉर्थ ईस्ट में है. So he didn't say it once, he said it many, many, many times. When he went to Madras, and there he gave a call telling the Dravidian people, you see, I mean, I don't know if you are familiar with this term, but the way the ethnic composition in India is generally described, you have the Aboriginal population who live in the forests, and we have them, some of them as, you know, Pakivas and so on. Then you have the Dravidian people who were driven to the south of India, and the so-called Indo-Aryans who came and took over. We all are a mix of all that. You know, if you look at, I've done my DNA, and many of my friends have done it. We are all a mixture of all these people. Anyhow, so in the south are the Dravidian people, and Jinnah says, if you demand a separate state, the Muslims and the Muslim League will support you. So he even wanted southern India to be independent of northern India. Well, so where is the evidence? In 1940, Abul Kalam Azad wrote him telegrams saying that, look, let's form a coalition government, national government, in which Muslim League and Congress will have equal representation. And we then demand that the British transfer power to us, and then we decide how to rule India. And I've given Jinnah's response saying that you are a renegade to Islam. You are a poster boy of the Indian National Congress. Leave it and join the Muslim League. So Jinnah rejected all such proposals. No such idea presented by the Congress was acceptable to him. But the problem is, how do you get Pakistan from the Hindus or the Congress? No, you have to get it from the British. So Jinnah then joins hands with Lord Linlithgow, and I've quoted Linlithgow saying that I had a personal interest in Jinnah in promoting him. And had Jinnah had the Muslim League and Congress joined hands, maybe we could not have held on to India. So this is the British Viceroy of India admitting it. And I've quoted scholars who have all this evidence to name. The Congress commits another major blunder. It calls for the Quit India movement on the 8th of August 1942. From that day onwards until June 1945, all the Congress leaders of any stature were in jail. So the Congress was removed from the political field, and the Muslim League was cooperating now with the British. And that is when Jinnah makes the breakthrough. Up until then, he was an important leader, but had become the leader of a minority. Now there was nobody to challenge him. He went everywhere and tried to convince the Muslims to support the idea of Pakistan. Of course, he was opposed by the Jamiyat-e-Ulama-e-Hind, by Abul Kalam Azad, and many other great Muslims who said that the partition of India will mean the partition of the Muslims of India. You will break the strength of the Muslims and the future of Islam. But I then quote you on the 30th of March 1941 at Kanpur. He was asked, what will happen to us? You want Pakistan in areas where there is already a Pakistan. All the chief ministers elected are Muslims. What will happen to us? And I've quoted Jinnah saying that I will make, these Muslims experience martyrdom, shahadat, and have them smashed. कि मैं इनको तबाह कर दूंगा आजादी के लिए. He is on record. और वही हुआ है अब जो आप रोज शोर मचाते हैं कि ये वहां पे होता है. मेरी अपनी theory ये है. This is how I see. Had the Muslims remained in India, you would have an equal share. There was no chance it would become a Hindu majoritarian state. In the army, you had 42%, 38, 42% representation, when in 47 you were only 25% of the population. In police, it was about 50% all over India. The British preferred Muslims and Sikhs into the police and in the army. This is well known. Anyhow, we'll come to that later in your QA. To cut a very long story short, Jinnah Saab never wanted anything but Pakistan. So then, what did the British want? The British did not want to leave India. Nobody talks about it. In 1942, when the last viceroy came, second last, Lord Wavell, Lord Linlithgow, who was now leaving, told him, we are here for another 30 years. And that means 1973. By that time, I would have done my master's and left Pakistan. I was just born a few months before Pakistan came into being. All these years, the British were not going to go. So what made them leave? Partly the Quit India movement had created a lot of uprising and so on, despite Muslim League cooperating. There was the Indian National Army, which had created trouble in Burma and all. And then in February 1946, the naval ratings, people working in the British Navy, they revolted. And the leader was M.N. Khan, a Muslim, who led this revolt. So the British realized they can't hold on to India anymore, partly because of the opposition, growing opposition, but largely because although they had won the Second World War, British industry, British food supply was smashed. They were becoming insolvent. They had no money. The Americans were paying the salaries of the British Army officers. This is all on record. And it is America who insisted that you transfer power and leave. That was the rising power in the West. The Americans up until then were anti-colonial because they themselves had won their freedom from the British. So they were sympathetic to the freedom of India. They were opposed to the creation of Pakistan. This is also on record. Nobody mentions this in Pakistan, and the Americans hate me because I put it on record. Till the very end, they opposed Pakistan, saying that this is going to be a divisive, religious type of state, whereas the Congress ideology is secular, democratic, and we need to build in South Asia such a power against the communists who were rising then in China. I've put that also in the public. I've never seen others do it. It's all in the Jinnah book, and you can go and look at the actual primary sources from where this is recorded. So now, 1945, an election is held in the UK. The war is over, and Churchill, who didn't want to leave India and was so and so, he loses the election. The Labour Party comes into power. and they announced new elections to find out what the Indians wanted. The elections were announced in, I think, July 1945. The campaign began in August 1945. And if I have quoted the Punjab governors every fortnightly reporting that the Muslim League is using communalism, it is preaching that dislike and hatred for Hindus and Sikhs, and it is promising that Pakistan will be an Islamic state based on the original pristine ideas of Islam. Sharia will be the law, and this is true. And every fortnight, this report is there. Then I also talk about Jinnah meeting Pir Manki Sharif in the Northwest frontier and promising him that in future Pakistan, because 75% of the representation will be with Muslims, there was no question that the laws will not be made according to Quran and Sunnah. I have given the whole, communication between them. So people who say that Jinnah was looking for a secular state have nothing to tell us from where the secular idea comes into this picture, except the 11th August speech, 1947. We come to that later. So what did the British want? The British wanted India somehow to remain under their control. So they came up with the Cabinet Mission Plan. The Cabinet Mission Plan proposed a loose Indian Union with only defense, foreign affairs, and communications with the center, all the rest given to the provinces. And India was divided into three groups, A, B, and C. A was Hindu majority provinces, B was Muslim majority provinces of Northwest India, and C was Muslim majority province of Bengal in the northeastern zone. The Sikhs of Punjab protested that they don't want to be part of Group B. The Muslims of Northwest Frontier, Abdul Ghaffar Khan, they also said we don't want to be part of Group B, but the British were not listening. The Sikhs demanded that they be given a separate 6 states. Even that was overruled. The Chief Minister of Punjab, Sir Khizr Hayat Tiwana, the last Punjab Unionist Party Chief Minister, then called Prime Minister, he proposed that you create Punjab as a third dominion, the dominion of India, Pakistan, and Punjab. That was overruled. In Bengal, there was a movement to create a Bengal dominion. The Congress opposed it. The Sikhs opposed all of Punjab being given to Pakistan. And the Hindus and Congress opposed the whole of Bengal being given to Pakistan because these were Muslim majority provinces. I don't know how much time we have, but I must point out. In 1944, Mahatma Gandhi was released to go and talk to Jinnah if they could agree upon the future of India. And Gandhi ji and Quaid-e-Azam met, I think, 19 times, 21 times at Jinnah Saab's palatial house in Malabar. And Gandhi ji offered that, okay, at the end of war, we can hold a plebiscite in those areas of India where the Muslims want a separate state. But in that plebiscite, all those people who live there will vote, which means that if the Muslims want it to be Pakistan, but the Hindus and Sikhs don't, then those portions in which they were in a majority would be taken and given to India. And I think this was very fair. If Jinnah could claim for a minority all over India, separate states because they were in concentration in 2 places, then the same principle must and should apply in Punjab and Bengal, where Hindus and Sikhs were in a majority. But Jinnah would not agree. So the Cabinet Mission Plan, Jinnah accepted only when on the 4th of April, the cabinet delegation told Mr. Jinnah, look, Mr. Jinnah, unless you can show how East and West Pakistan can be militarily defensible. You leave us no choice but to leave India united. At that point, Jinnah realized that unless I accept the cabinet mission plan, if they leave India united, it means they leave India united to the Indian National Congress. That's when he accepted. And on the 6th of June, he finally told the Muslim Leaguers to support him. He found a lot of opposition, but he told them, look, Pakistan is still our demand. We don't get it tomorrow, we get it in a few years. And every 10 years, the provinces have the right to opt out of India. So we will, within this framework, work for Pakistan all the time. The Indian National Congress rejected the cabinet mission plan, saying that a government of the stature of India without an effective center is not workable. So they then, at that point, I think in March 1947, 8th March, and then late, the Congress also accepted the partition. The partition itself was very painful. It was very badly organized by the British. They didn't take into cognition that already a lot of violence had been taking place. So ultimately, when the partition took place, 1 million at least Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs were killed. 90,000 women were abducted, many of them raped, some of them returned to their families, many of them rejected by their families because they had earned shame by being with the opponents. You know, all this. If you must read my Punjab partition book to go into the details. So Pakistan comes into being. 3 days before Pakistan comes into being, Jinnah Sahib makes a famous about turn. I think Imran Khan has been studying Jinnah Sahib and learned some of his tactics. He makes the famous speech, in this great state of Pakistan, Hindus will cease to be Hindus and Muslims will cease to be Muslims, not in a personal sense, because that is a matter of private faith, but as citizens of the state. And he goes on and on and on. And so our leftists and some liberals say, well, Jinnah actually wanted Pakistan to be a secular state. Now, that's nonsense. The reason is, at that time, Hindus and Sikhs were being hunted out of West Pakistan. This is true. You look at my Punjab book and you will find all the evidence. And they were running away for their lives. From East Punjab, 6 million Muslims were doing the same. And I think 500,000 Muslims were killed and 300,000 Hindus and Sikhs were killed in West Punjab and other parts of West Pakistan. And only in East Punjab, I think, 500 million Muslims were killed. 6 million had to move here, and 5.5 million Hindus and Sikhs of Punjab, Sindh frontier had to move in the other direction. But there were 35 million Muslims in the rest of India. If the Indian government had decided, like what was happening in Pakistan, to push all those Muslims into India, Pakistan would collapse. West Pakistan's population in 1947 was 33.9 million. How can you deal with another 30 million coming here, maybe 5 million from Bihar and that part going to East Bengal, which was very poor, but West Pakistan would have crushed, would have crumbled. So I pay great compliments to Mahatma Gandhi, who gave up his life, and to Jawaharlal Nehru, who saw to it that the Muslim minority which wanted to stay in India could live so and do it in peace. After Pakistan came into being, I think Jinnah Sahib did not apply himself as a statesman to the politics of Pakistan. As Governor General, his duty was only to be the head of state. All power should have gone to the Prime Minister, Liaquat Ali Khan. But we all know that until about April 1948, when he started becoming sick, he used to preside over all the cabinet meetings, make all the decisions, and the Prime Minister very tamely signed everything which Jinnah Sahib approved. He further went on, I say that the destruction of democracy begins from this stage, because institutions require proper parliamentary practices. He dismissed an elected government in the northwest frontier. I know Farooq Dar Sahab has a different position, but I have quoted many others who don't agree with that, including Khalid bin Said, who I think is the greatest Pakistani political scientist before me, if I may dare say. He says there was no such thing that the northwest frontier government was not willing to cooperate with the new government of Pakistan. Only Jinnah used his arbitrary powers, which not even the viceroys had, to dismiss an elected government which had majority in the house. He did the same to a Muslim League government in Sindh, Ayub Khodus. What was Khodus' big fault? What wrong he had done? He protested that Karachi should remain part of Sindh and not be made federal territory and taken away because it's the major city. Jinnah Sahab would not brook any opposition or criticism. He was dismissed. He goes to Bengal, where 55% of the Pakistan population lived and who speak all Bengali. They are not conversant in Urdu, and tells them Urdu will be the national language of Pakistan. And that was the beginning of the Bengali disenchantment with Pakistan, which became worse over the years. I think I'll end here because we need question and answers, and I've actually spoken my heart out. All what I have said is what I believe and what I have demonstrated in my book. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. It was great listening to you, and I wish we will have continued, but I have got different questions on WhatsApp due to description of meeting. Most students ask what Jinnah wanted, like after creation of Pakistan. Like he didn't ever use the word secular in his speeches. So
Yes, sir.
why
So-
didn't he become part of Constitution Committee, or why didn't he took part in constitution making? And you talked about cabinet mission, and many say that cabinet mission implied the creation of Pakistan, and we could have taken full Punjab and Bengal. What is your take on it?
Well, first of all, 11th August speech, I say, is the only speech of its kind. There is Shakespeare who once said, one swallow does not make a summer. Swallow is, this bird which from Africa during summer comes to England and then goes back during winter. But another way of saying it is, one sunny day doesn't make a summer. This is more popular. You will all understand. This is the only speech. On the 14th of August, when actually the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan was inaugurated, Mountbatten got up and said, well, you have your own nation, your own state, and you have had great Muslim statesmen and leaders like Emperor Akbar. Jinnah Sahab gets up and says, no, well, Akbar is all right, but the real inspiration is Prophet Muhammad, and I quote him, who first defeated the Jews and Christians and then treated them in an exemplary, good manner. So the connection to the state of Medina and the Holy Prophet is brought back by Jinnah. Then he writes a letter to the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, Ikhwan-e-Muslimin, Hassan al-Banna, and I've quoted that letter as well, saying that please send some Islamic scholar who should come here and tell us how can we make Pakistan a truly Islamic state. Third, the only department Jinnah Sahab created on his own was the Islamic Reconstruction Institute in Punjab, which was to advise Pakistan on how to have an Islamic state, an Islamic economy, and Islamic educational system. Finally, two more instances. On the 25th of January 1948, he addressed the Karachi Bar Association. Bar Association is the association of lawyers, where he says irritatedly, I am all the time being asked, what will be the constitution of Pakistan? And he says, the constitution of Pakistan was given 1300 years ago. It will be democratic and Islamic and so on. He says this. Then I think the last public function he attended was either June or July 1948 before Ziyarat, and then he fell very ill. At the inauguration of the State Bank of Pakistan, he says, we don't want capitalism, we don't want socialism, we want an Islamic system. So you tell us what will be an Islamic economy. So as far as Jinnah Sahib is concerned, I think if at all you can associate any vision with him, it will be some sort of a Muslim state which is democratic and Islamic at the same time. That's so very difficult to define constitutionally. But that's what his idea was. He used Islamic fundamentalist arguments also. I've quoted him in September 1945 in Karachi saying that all Muslims are advised to read the Quran because the Quran guides us in all sectors of life: political, international law, constitution, economy, and that is our constitution. So these are very fundamentalist positions, and he gave a free hand to the ulama, in Punjab and in Frontier and Sindh to preach Pakistan as a true Islamic state based on the Sharia. So I would say there are as many visions of Jinnah about Pakistan as there are people who remember what he said. He said different things. And historian Yaqub Bangash, if you are all familiar with him, I'm sure you have met him, he told me that he met Sahibzada Yaqub Ali Khan, Pakistan's foreign minister for a long time, who told him that about 8 months after Pakistan came into being, he, Sahibzada Sahab, and Sayyid Ehsan was in the Navy and Sahibzada Sahab was in the army. They were aides of the Governor General. They said, we went to Jinnah Sahab and said, sir, what is happening? Every day we find from India something developing on the constitution, but nothing has happened on the constitution of Pakistan. And he says, and I've quoted, look, boys, I have been making different promises to different types of Pakistanis. So this problem will only be sorted out by the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan. So he transferred that to the Constitutional Assembly, and then we need another discussion on why Pakistan could never come up with a constitution which would remain from the beginning as the Indians have done. What's the problem?
Yes.
So about now cabinet mission plan. The cabinet mission plan was not acceptable to the Indian National Congress, not so much because of this, but it also included that the 571 princely states would surrender only foreign affairs and defense and nothing else. And if you want to have a democracy, one man, one vote, whatever, as the Congress wanted, the princely states could simply say, no, that's not part of the bargain. That was one. Then every 10 years, if such a union could be dissolved, why would you want a state which from the beginning is ridden with this precarious nature of being broken up? So then the Congress went for a state which they could manage. And that's what has happened. Simple as that. Suppose Punjab and Bengal had remained, and so what would have happened? The percentage of Muslims was only 25% in 1947. Most seats in the provinces or in the Central Assembly would still have been Hindus. I mean, this is a myth people throw around without looking at the figures.
Thank you very much, sir. Firstly, I would present my apologies for disruption. I would give you a minute to what your Jinnah is like Akbar Ahmed says, he is Saladin for Muslims of India. To some, he is charismatic leader. To some, Stanley Wolpert, he goes far more lengths. To authors of Freedom at Midnight, they go on abusing Jinnah like Mountbatten in interviews. So what your Jinnah is, only we have 1 minute left. Thank you very much for your kindness and humbleness again.
Well, I prefer not to sit in judgment and make a big statement. I have only shown you the qualities of Jinnah. Some of them he used in one way, some of them in another way. And the consequences are all before you. I would not deny that he was definitely a born leader. No ordinary person who could have attained all this. But could he have done it without joining hands with the British, get Pakistan? No. So Pakistan was created, and I mean, this we didn't have time to go into, as a buffer state against the Soviet Union. You know, all that discussion is there, but we don't have the time. So Jinnah Saab already bartered away Pakistan's sovereignty to the Western Bloc, saying that we will serve your interests in South Asia and in the Middle East. Because in the Middle East there was oil. Here they thought Stalin and the Soviet Union would come in. That's why they created Pakistan. I've quoted the British military's memorandum of 12th May 1947 saying that if Hindustan may go its own way, because they didn't trust Nehru and the socialists, whereas Jinnah Saab wants to remain in the Commonwealth. And if Pakistan remains in the Commonwealth, we should demand Karachi port facilities, access to Pakistani airfields, and Muslim manpower. And actually, honestly, they got it. Who did the Afghan jihad?
Yes.
Jihad of an Islamic jihad done on the behest of Americans. ये कब हुआ यार? ये कभी jihad ऐसे भी होता है? Jihad की theory तो जरा पढ़ो.
Oh, okay, sir. Thank you very much. We would stop here, and thank you very much again, and thank you for your kindness. Thank you.
Thank you very much.